Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Kristen and I for today's webinar. We are going to be talking about embedded learning opportunities within everyday activities and routines, so we welcome you. Just to give you some background information, my name is Lisa Terry, and I am an early intervention professional development consultant. I work with Virginia Commonwealth University with the Partnership for People with Disabilities, and I am working in early intervention. I've been, my background, I've been a service coordinator and an educator and then a supervisor of the educators prior to this role. And I'm going to go ahead and allow Kristen to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Great, thank you, Lisa. Well, thank you all for joining us. My name is Kristen Kugel, and I'm an assistant professor at George Mason University. I am within the early childhood education program, and my area of expertise is early childhood special education. So I teach our early childhood special education courses, and I also conduct research regarding naturalistic instruction and embedded learning opportunities and determining effective ways to support professionals to use evidence-based practices. Prior to joining George Mason and other institutions of higher education, I was a preschool teacher, preschool inclusion teacher. I was also a K through 5th grade special education teacher, and I worked as a birth to 3 early intervention provider.
Great, thank you. So this webinar is really a collaborative effort that is brought to you from the Virginia Division of Early Childhood and the Integrated Training Collaborative, which is a project with the Partnership for People with Disabilities and Virginia Commonwealth University. So for those who are unfamiliar with Virginia DEC, you can find more information at www.veidec.org, or you can also contact Patty Eitmiller. She's a current Virginia DEC president, and Sarah Dermont, she's a Virginia DEC president-elect. So she will begin her presidency will start beginning July 1st. And so thank you, Jeannie, for posting those links. So if you would like that, you can access those links in the chat box for that information. And I'm going to go ahead and let Kristen talk about our agenda for today.
Great. So for today, we will be providing an overview of embedded learning opportunities, and we refer to these as ELOs throughout the presentation. We'll also be talking about the 4 steps to implement ELOs or embedded learning opportunities, and then we will talk about resources or supports we can use to ensure that we are using embedded learning opportunities with fidelity. So, for example, a routines matrix.
Great, thank you so much. And you all received a handout prior to this, and so you are more than welcome to utilize that handout. We're going to kind of prompt you sometimes throughout it to kind of reference to it as we kind of go through the different steps in the process. The next thing I want to do is just really find out a little bit more about everybody that's participating today. So we're going to invite you to share your current position. And to do this, you are going to use the polling feature. And so if you go look under your name, the 4th box, you'll see ABC, and you can choose A for early intervention, B for special education teacher, or C for other, and then type into the chat where you are currently working. So go ahead and make those choices. Michaela says A, early intervention, great. Yeah, so if you can't find your polling feature, you're more than welcome to just type it in the chat box. Jeannie, do you mind going ahead and publishing that poll for us? Okay, so looks like we have a couple in early intervention, and let's see, we have one Steve, and that's Debbie and Cheryl. Debbie and Cheryl, you guys faculty? If you don't mind just typing other in the chat box. Oh, TTAC. Okay, perfect. Great. Thank you so much for letting us know and clarifying that. So let's look at where you are in the state. So here we're going to use our pointer tool, and in order to access your pointer tool, there's a vertical toolbar that is to the right of the participant box, and if you look at the second icon, it might be a starburst, and if you click it, there's an arm that's going to extend and give you multiple options. So I'm going to choose a little starburst, and here I am over in Virginia Beach. This may be Melissa. Melissa said she was over here in Norfolk. Looks like we have one in Hampton, Richmond, up north near Arlington and Alexandria. Great. So it looks like we have a lot all over the place in the state. So we are going to really look at the DEC Recommended Practices, and I'm just curious if anybody is familiar with the recommended practices. And Jeannie posted those links. Thank you, Jeannie, over there in the chat box for you. But go ahead and raise your hand. So to find your raise your hand, that's going to be the third box under your name. And just raise your hand if you're familiar with it. And it's okay if you're not. I'm going to talk a little bit about it and explain it. Great. So it looks like most people are familiar with the DEC Recommended Practices. And we're going to really focus on the instruction practices in that strand today. But the Division for Early Childhood, it really promotes the policies and advances those evidence-based practices that really support the families and enhance their optimal development of young children. And the focus age is from 0 to 8. So those who are at risk or have developmental delays and disabilities. So DEC, that's an international membership organization, which anyone is welcome to join that is working for or on behalf of any kind of children with disabilities or special needs in their families. So if you are not familiar with it, I highly recommend going to those links and checking it out. And again, today we're going to be focusing on the instruction links, the instruction strands. And on our slides, you may see at the bottom just certain recommended practices that are aligned that we just wanted to point out to you. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Kristen.
Great. So to start our conversation regarding embedded learning opportunities, we wanted to pose a question. So I'm wondering, what do embedded learning opportunities mean to you? So if you could use the chat that Lisa showed you earlier and just type a brief response to what do embedded learning opportunities mean to you. That'll be a nice start to our conversation today. All right, I see that Debbie and Cheryl said embedded within daily routines. Michaela and Julie said opportunities that occur during everyday activities in your normal routine. Excellent responses. Give everybody a couple more minutes. Alicia said the provider intentionally planning opportunities to address specific outcomes or goals, using opportunities that arise in everyday routines to work on different strategies and goals. Great. So these are all excellent responses to frame our discussion. And just to elaborate a little bit on what you all shared, because all of your responses aligned with what embedded learning opportunities are, but these are brief intentional teaching exchanges. So like you all mentioned, they are provided during typical routines and activities. So whatever the child is engaging in on a daily basis, these are the opportunities that we want to be using to provide brief intentional teaching exchanges. We know that these are critical for young children's acquisition of skills. So we know that all children learn through embedded learning opportunities, but we know our children who are at risk for delays or who have developmental delays or disabilities need more frequent opportunities to practice target skills, and embedded learning opportunities are focused on a particular skill. So although we know that embedded learning opportunities are an evidence-based practice and they align with the Division for Early Childhood's recommended practice, the strand that Lisa shared earlier, we do see a gap between what we know are evidence-based practices regarding embedded learning opportunities and those practices taking place. So some research that my colleagues and I have been engaged in is looking at the use of embedded learning opportunities within early childhood environments. And what we've observed is that there really is variability across educators, also across the routines in which educators are using embedded learning opportunities. There's variability in terms of the types of embedded learning opportunities that are being used. And then finally, educators have indicated experiencing challenges and needing support in using embedded learning opportunities. And I should preface this by saying when I say educators, I'm referring to early childhood teachers, early childhood special education teachers, early intervention providers, anyone that you would consider an educator or caregiver of a young child, just because we have a lot of people who could fit within that role within early childhood. So why do we want to use embedded learning opportunities? We know that they are an evidence-based practice supported by a large body of research. We know that there are recommended practices within our field. Again, they align with the Division for Early Childhood recommended practices. And like I mentioned on the previous slide, we know that children, particularly those with disabilities, need multiple opportunities to practice skills across activities and routines. There's several benefits associated with using embedded learning opportunities. The first is that they really require little change to the existing environment or routines because, again, they're embedded, just like you all mentioned in the chat box. They capitalize on children's interests, so children are engaged and therefore they're interested in what's taking place within their natural environment, and therefore they're motivated and the engagement is being sustained to provide opportunities to practice target goals, outcomes, or skills. They increase the likelihood that the child will be able to use the skill within functional activities. They encourage the use of the skill in multiple activities and routines, and again, whatever those everyday activities and routines are. And they support participation in inclusive settings. So now that we've discussed a little bit about the evidence behind embedded learning opportunities, the challenges that sometimes are experienced with embedded learning opportunities, and the importance of them, we're going to move through 4 steps to implement embedded learning opportunities that include identifying functional outcomes, identifying everyday activities and routines, embedding learning opportunities within everyday activities and routines, and monitoring progress. So as we get started on each of these steps, there was an activity sheet that was paired with this webinar, and I would encourage you, if possible, to have the activity sheet with you as we go through, because you're welcome to use this to document any notes or ideas that are shared within our webinar today. So for example, if you have that sheet with you under Activity 1, you'll see a table and it has the steps listed, an example. So we're going to be moving through each one of these steps, and you can also use this to document any ideas that are shared. So to get us started, step one is identifying functional goals or outcomes. So using the chat box again, I'd like for you to type in one target goal or outcome you are working toward in your work environment. And because I know some of the folks on this call, you might not be working directly with children. So if you're not working directly with children, maybe you're supporting others, maybe you could type in one goal or outcome you are supporting caregivers or early childhood educators to use, or one goal or outcome that they're working on. I'll give you a couple minutes. Okay, so helping my staff reduce risk of burnout. Okay. And so as we move forward too, I know that we probably all have a lot of different goals or outcomes that we're working towards. So just to frame our conversation as we move forward, we should focus on child goals or outcomes. And I know in early intervention, we also focus on family outcomes. So for the purpose of our discussion today, I think it would be the most beneficial if we focus on child outcomes. So a child using signs to communicate. Yeah, that's a really good point. We have to figure out ways to support staff, because if we can't do that, they're going to have challenges with families and children. Absolutely, great point. Pointing to request items with eye contact. Okay, great.
Kristen, it looks like Melissa said working with families to teach their child to use signs to communicate as well.
Yeah, thank you. I'll give you a few more seconds because I can see that some people are typing, so I want to give you an opportunity to respond. Okay, so I have a couple child-focused functional goals or outcomes, and also appreciate that Melissa included the family component. She's working in early intervention, it looks like, to support the family to use embedded learning opportunities. That's great. All right, so step one is we do want to consider our functional goals or outcomes, and then step two is we want to think about the everyday activities and routines that the child and family are engaging in, or if we're in a preschool setting, early childhood special education setting, we want to be thinking about the routines and activities that are taking place. So for example, I'm going to speak to the early childhood special education preschool type of setting. And so this might include arrival, perhaps a large group meeting, small groups, child-led activities where they are engaging in various materials throughout the classroom, perhaps music and movement, mealtime, and transition types of routines. And then Lisa's going to talk a little bit more about early intervention settings.
Thanks, Kristen. So in early intervention, we are really lucky because we're able to really work directly with the families and the caregivers. And so what we really want to do is focus on the information that we're gathering from them and then how we're observing them in real time. And so when we think about learning activities and routines, we typically think of, meal times and play and reading stories and family outings or going to the grocery store, nap time, and bedtime as well. But really, we want to think about that and push them a little bit further, right? And so think about, like a routine such as going outside. So this is my son Benjamin when he was little. And so this is just all the different steps involved going outside. So go ahead and type into the chat box. What do you see? What kind of learning opportunities do you see in each of these pictures? Whether they're big or little, just type in any kind of learning opportunities you see. Independence with putting shoes, coat, backpack on, yes. So how he's participating and how he's helping to do that and how I'm supporting him in my role, right, as his parent as well. Great. What else do you see? Going to school, yeah. So how I'm helping the transition of going to school. So if we're walking out the door and he's going to childcare in the morning, for example. Riding his tricycle, yes. And you can see on his little face here, he's a little bit more hesitant about riding that tricycle. It makes him a little bit more nervous because he doesn't have it down. Making choices, either by pointing or naming what he might want to ride, since it seems like he has a few different ride-on toys, yes. And as you can see here he is. He's a lot happier. And so each of these different steps, you know, like here is he's got to go get his shoes, right, too, and then he's got to put them on, and then he wants help, and he's kind of pushing his leg up to let me help him put those on. And then he wants to go get his book bag, and he wants to fill it with all these different toys that he wants to put in here to bring with him outside. And so that's the part of the picture that you missed. But that's enough. All those different steps are different opportunities again. So then we get outside, and then he wants to ride his big boy bike first, right? But as you can see, he's not that great at it yet, so he doesn't feel as confident in it. So he goes back to his ride-on toy, and that's where he's really happy and he's excited. So each of these routines, so this is a large routine of just going outside, right? But each of these routines, they really do have all of these broken down micro routines that we can look at and build on each one of them as a separate learning opportunity. And really, there's different feelings involved from it too. So he has different feelings. I may have different feelings. And so how we're supporting the whole family in those. So the next step is the activity, right? So go ahead and think about those goals that you previously wrote, you know, pointing to request items with eye contact, for example, and identify an everyday activity or routine that's part of that family life in the environment or in the environment that you're working. So go ahead and type that into chat. So think about the activity or routine that you can support that goal in. Next time, yes. So if they're looking at pointing or making choices or being intentional with their eye contact by making a choice between objects, looking at the caregiver versus looking at the snack to make the choice too. Getting in the car, setting the table, yes. I love getting in the car because I think that's something that I feel like children probably have multiple opportunities, and we probably we don't take advantage of it because I feel like families are really always leaving or going somewhere in the car multiple times throughout the day, so they have that opportunity of that repetition to support their child. And there's so much involved, whether their child's just walking from the door all the way to the car, if they're climbing up in their car seat, and then when they're participating by helping buckle themselves. Their buckle is kind of like a little puzzle in itself too. So it's just all of those, you know, ways for them to strengthen and to problem solve and figure things out and use their language. So I love getting in the car as another example. Setting the table, yes. Teaching them how to help their family participate in an activity. So really being responsible, being a responsible citizen. Kids that we're teaching them those skills. Great. So those are some great examples and really thinking a little bit more outside the box. I'm going to let Kristen talk about step 3.
Yes, thank you. So now that we've identified step 1, which is identifying a functional goal or outcome, and we've identified everyday activities and routines in step 2, we now have the foundation that we need to be really intentional to embed learning opportunities within everyday activities and routines. So step 3 is we are simply being intentional to provide these learning opportunities that include, and this embedded learning opportunity process includes an antecedent that gives the child the opportunity to practice their child goal or outcome, and then this ELO process ends with a consequence. So we're going to talk a little bit more about each of these steps within an embedded learning opportunity. So the antecedent is what happens immediately before the child goal or outcome can occur. So I often like to think of these as temptations or opportunities to practice what is within the IEP goal or the ISSP outcome. And these are specific to what the adult will do to provide an opportunity for the child to practice the skill. And once this step of an embedded learning opportunity is in place, research would suggest that the other parts of an embedded learning opportunity, the child receiving that opportunity then gives them the opportunity to practice their goal or outcome, and then the consequence is likely to occur as well. So I think the most challenging aspect of an embedded learning opportunity is really being intentional about delivering these antecedents that align with the child's goal or outcome. So here are some examples of antecedents. And I'm thinking about what one of you mentioned earlier regarding using signs to communicate. And all of these antecedents would appropriately align with providing opportunities to give that child an opportunity to practice using signs to communicate. So for example, if rearrange the physical environment, maybe replace a desired item in sight but out of reach, that gives the child the opportunity to practice signing for a desired item. We can also prompt the child. We could provide a verbal prompt like, what would you like? Or tell me what you would like. We can provide some sort of gesture with a point to maybe their desired item. We could use a picture. We could also model signing. We could provide the child physical assistance. So if they're, if this is something that they're just beginning to learn, we can support them by providing them physical assistance to sign. And then time delay is really important because I often say that the best or the easiest solution isn't always the best solution. So I can say as a parent, a lot of times it feels a lot easier to just go and get what my child might need, but that doesn't necessarily provide them the opportunity to practice a target outcome. So using time delay where we wait to see how they respond after we place something in sight, out of reach, and then support them in attaining that through signs. Now, in early intervention, we know that we as the educator don't want to be the one that is consistently delivering the antecedent because we don't live with that child day in and day out. So from an early intervention perspective, it's going to be really important to model antecedents for families and caregivers and provide them information, just like we see in this picture. And then we see the role switch, right? So maybe the caregiver is initially behind the child pushing, and the early intervention provider is out in front modeling a specific strategy, but then we see them change roles, and then the early intervention provider is standing to the side watching to provide the caregiver the opportunity to be the one delivering the antecedent, because we know that it's really important for the caregivers to be the ones delivering those opportunities because they're the ones spending time with the children and engaging with them through their daily activities and routines. The next step is after we've delivered an antecedent, and again, there's a lot of different types of antecedents. I mentioned those on the previous slide. These should provide opportunities for the child to practice their target goal or outcome. So this should align with what we would see within the individualized education plan or the individualized family service plan, because we would want that antecedent to provide the child the opportunity to engage in that outcome or that goal. So it's the functional goal or outcome we would like to see the child demonstrate. That's the second part of an embedded learning opportunity. But it's important to note the reason that we've identified what's within an IEP or an IFSP is because a child has not yet demonstrated this. So it's important to think about the developmental process and how we can support the child in giving them opportunities to approximate and eventually use these functional goals or outcomes independently, but it's important to think about that process. It's also important to think about the most important thing is that we want engagement to continue. So there's some things that we can do if we're observing that the child is not responding to the antecedent we deliver. We might need to provide more support by modeling or providing physical assistance, because the most important thing, again, is that that engagement continues. And then an embedded learning opportunity concludes with a consequence, and this is what happens immediately after the goal or outcome. And so typically a consequence might be a child obtaining a desired item. So for example, when I mentioned placing a desired item in sight to outreach, maybe they've approximated a sign, or maybe they've used a sign with support. We then want them to get whatever that desired item is, because the goal of embedded learning opportunities is that they're going to give children a reason to want to continue to engage in these goals and outcomes because they have a really good result for them. Another example might be the child obtaining social attention, or the child gaining access to a preferred activity, or maybe even some sort of praise or excitement from the people around them. It's really going to be dependent upon what's taking place during that interaction. So to provide an example of what all these steps would look like together, a preschool age example for a child who has a goal of initiating social interactions by requesting might look like an antecedent would be upon arrival at school. The teacher says, "Lily, why don't you ask Colton if he wants to play blocks with you?" Then the goal would be Lily approaches Colton and says, "Want to play?" And then the consequence would be Colton says, "Sure," and Lily and Colton go to the block area and begin playing. So in this example, the antecedent would have been a prompt because the teacher prompted Lily to request to engage in a play routine, and then Lily approximated that request, want to play, and then that concluded with what she wanted to happen, that social interaction. She and Colton then began playing together in the block center. So embedded learning opportunities, like I said, as early childhood educators, despite where we are working, whether it's an early intervention setting, a preschool classroom, an early care center, we as educators tend to provide a lot of really great opportunities for learning, which are wonderful. I think where we experience the most challenges and what research would suggest is that intentionality piece of being really intentional in that the opportunities we provide align with a child's goals and outcomes. So we want to think about how we can provide ourselves support, how we can provide others support, and using embedded learning opportunities to be intentional so that we can be sure that the opportunities we are providing align with children's goals or outcomes. So one type of support we can use is an embedded learning opportunity matrix. And we provided you an example of this in a template of this within the document that's here within this webinar. And on this slide, there's a completed embedded learning opportunity matrix. And the one in the document is blank so that you can use it if you'd like as a template for yourself or for those you support. But what you might find in this is the child goal or outcome, which would be Julia will use single word phrases to communicate her wants and needs. And then in the left column, you see everyday activities and routines that are identified. So we have mealtime, bath, child-led play. And then in the column in the right, we have embedded learning opportunities you will use or support caregivers to use. So for mealtime, we have Julia's father will present 2 meal choices and wait for Julia to communicate and provide her with a desired choice. During bath time, Julia's father will place desired bath toys in sight but out of reach, wait for Julia to communicate and provide her with her desired bath toy. And then child-led play, Julia's mother will model single word phrases during play routines, wait for Julia to communicate and continue with the play activity. So there's different antecedents or opportunities here for Julia to practice her outcome, which is using single word phrases to communicate her wants and needs. So again, the purpose of this matrix is to provide support in being intentional in our use of embedded learning opportunities and to think about how we can use embedded learning opportunities throughout daily activities and routines. So this embedded learning opportunity matrix is very similar to the one that you'll find in the document that I mentioned. But what we would like for you to do is think about how you use the ELO matrix. We're all coming from a lot of different roles in terms of our professional environment in which we're working. So if you would take a minute and think about how you might be able to use this embedded learning opportunity matrix and then type your response in the chat.
Kristen, I always think that this will be the most interesting because it's hard in early intervention, I think, too, so I can see why it's the most challenging to be more intentional about it, just because I feel like we're always go, 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 nonstop. We don't always have that time to think about it, right? And so I really do appreciate this ELO matrix, and so I would love to hear other ideas from other people on how they would use it, or any kind of advice or ideas that you have or that you've found in your research too.
Great. Yeah, let's see what emerges in the chat and then we can continue the discussion. Really great points. Right, Corey made a really great point. So this seems like a helpful tool for students who are just learning about ELOs. This is pretty simple, absolutely. So thinking about that process of naturalistic instruction and being intentional. So really great point, Corey. Give and take and ask parents to bring to the assessment for service planning and see if their idea of goals changes. I think that's an excellent suggestion because it would be a way to immediately partner with families in thinking about everyday activities and routines and how those can be used intentionally and aligned with the outcome. To develop functional, help me out with this acronym, I'm not sure.
It's short-term goals.
Short-term goals, thank you. Short-term goals that involves the family and caregiver supporting the child. Great.
Yeah,
yeah.
Well, I feel like this is actually a really great idea, kind of looking at it, like especially Health Southside too, and Talisha, they talk about using it to support when we're writing the outcomes or we're thinking about it, and I think it'll help kind of drive some of that conversation with families and get the information. So that was a great idea and a great suggestion.
Yes, and I love the family focus. So it's not focused on provider-child, but rather the provider-family partnership and using everyday activities and routines. Great. To be intentional about activities and routines, learning opportunities that are focused on goals, outcomes, rather than just noting the same ones. Yeah, absolutely. Working through it with the family to find out what routines and opportunities they find important to work on the goal. Great. Great. And I would say when I was providing early intervention services, it was in a different state, but the same premise of best practices in terms of supporting families to embed learning opportunities and everyday activities and routines, and that is how I use the routine matrix. It helps me really be organized and intentional about each family's everyday activities and routines, because we know that changes from one family to another family. And it also really helps me keep track of those types of learning opportunities that we had discussed and began practicing together, and so that way I could get feedback from the family on how things were going with the types of antecedents that we had discussed during the previous visit. But I would say my response would align with what has been mentioned so far, and that it really promoted that intentionality and partnership. And I see this, so Talisha said this really does promote the importance of understanding the family's priorities, concerns, and their individualized routines and activities. Absolutely. Child will point to request items, could practice at snack time, could practice while getting dressed, between two shirts, could point to remote to have dad turn on TV. Yes, and I love that you all are also thinking about routines that are so unique to each family. Yeah, thinking about the same outcome across many routines, right? Yeah, but I think they're coming up with really unique routines as well. So I think that's great. All right, great. Thanks for the discussion. It's been really interesting to see how different people are thinking about using this. All right, so the final step is monitoring progress. So we want to observe and collect data and consider if embedded learning opportunities are being delivered as intended. So for example, if we're looking at a child's progress and we're noticing maybe that we're not seeing as much progress as we would have expected, or maybe we're seeing a ton of progress, we want to consider how and when embedded learning opportunities are being used, because that's going to tell us if those embedded learning opportunities are effective. So there's different ways, of course, that we can collect progress monitoring data. So we might consider checklists. I know that Virginia has done a really great job of promoting the use of videos, which I think is an excellent resource for family practitioner partnership, using observation notes, and of course, communicating with the team. And I would just mention that, if we're noticing that the child is not responding the way that we expected, we might consider if the embedded learning opportunities are being delivered in the way they were intended. So we could look back at that routine matrix, right, that we developed with the family and think about maybe we didn't pick up, maybe we didn't pick out the best routines, or maybe we didn't pick out the best antecedents. Maybe we need to come back together and do some problem solving. Oh, and Corey mentioned we'd love to have videos anytime. Yeah, they're definitely reaching a lot of different stakeholders, such as people in higher ed.
Kristen, she's putting a plug in for our partnership because we would love to videotape people in practice. So we could make videos. So if there's anybody that was interested in being videotaped, she said it's my job, then you can see an email or Corey an email. We'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, and I would say within the higher ed setting, it's been really nice to share that as a resource, you know, with future early intervention providers. So great, I'm glad you mentioned that. So there's a lot of different ways that we can monitor a child's progress. These are some ideas noted here, but again, the important part is to then use that data to make decisions, right? Because it might mean that the embedded learning opportunities that we're using are really great. We should continue using them because we're seeing the child progress as we expected, or it might mean that we need to come back to the table with the family and practitioners and rethink our plan with the family. So putting it all together, the purpose of embedded learning opportunities is to be more intentional. We want to think about the child's goal or the child's outcome, and then we can use our routine matrix to think about the various routines and activities that the child is engaging in with their family, or if they're in a preschool setting, within their early care setting, whatever that might be. And then we want to think about the intentional opportunities or antecedents we can provide to give them opportunities to practice their target goal or outcome, and make sure that we are or we're supporting the family to then deliver a consequence that would encourage the child to continue to use their target goal or outcome. So let's take this to, as our time together is coming to an end, let's think about the routine matrix one more time and take it maybe to a personal level in terms of our profession. How might this routine matrix support you in being more, and maybe not so much related to the routine matrix, but how will you be more intentional in using embedded learning opportunities, or how might you support others to be more intentional in using embedded learning opportunities? And we'll use the chat box. All right, so ask more open-ended questions about what routines are important to the family. That's awesome, great. And Corey has a great question. How will you share this information with colleagues?
You know, Kristen, I think too, like, I was kind of thinking of like how I could use this as well. And I think even like the whole progress monitoring piece of it, like I would love to like do this on a couple of kids that I see and like kind of monitor that progress over time, and have these kind of sit down and have these conversations with the families. Because I think if I'm being more intentional, then the family's also going to be more intentional as well. So that was just an idea I had.
Yeah, that's another way you can model too. I didn't think of it in that way, Lisa, but modeling for the family, collecting data on the child's progress. That's a really interesting point. There's some things on the chat as well. I'll sometimes contact other therapists and service coordinators, put notes in the chart, sharing with colleagues during staff meetings. And I think I missed this one up here. So keeping it on hand to refer back to and make changes as routines and priorities change. Yeah, absolutely. These are great ideas. Support individualized goal and outcome writing. Yeah, great. Yeah, when we're thinking about that functional piece of IFSP outcomes, right? It's a great point. How this can support other things that we do and other things that we want to do that align with best practice. Great ideas. All right. So I think at this point we are ready to take any questions or additional points for discussion. Right, Lisa?
Yes. So go ahead, if you have any questions, just go ahead and type them in the chat box. I do want to go ahead and point out the references, and Jeannie is going to post in the chat box. You'll see a list of resources in addition that you may access. Thank you, Jeannie, so much. That may be beneficial for you to access. So if you have any questions, again, feel free to type them in, and thank you all for joining us. Oh, and just a note that Allison King, who is the training chair for Virginia DEC Board, she will send out the certificate for those that participated today. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all.